Hey there, it's Dr. Deb. I can't get my lighting good. Try that. How are you this evening? I have to tell you guys, I am myself personally jet lagged and exhausted, but otherwise I am fine. Now, here's my usual statement. Please, please, please join me in a chat so I know what you're thinking. I know how you feel about what I'm saying. Please interrupt. I love it if you interrupt. It's all good. And if you don't, it's okay too, because we're going to post this and it's going to go live for other people. So just, participate. First of all, can you hear me? Can you see me? I'd like to know who's out there. I'm trying to find out. Oh gosh, it goes back and forth. The number of people goes back and forth, and I don't know. Hi. Okay, great. Thank you. You see and hear me. Great. All right, guys. So, what is trauma bonding? It's another fancy word for what happens when someone has been abused, and because of their history of having been abused, they get taken advantage of by someone else. I hate the term, just like I hate the terms narcissism and gaslighting. It's not that these things aren't real and don't happen. It's that they avoid saying something important. And whenever you have a situation where some vital piece of information is left out or distorted, you're lying. You're not telling the truth. So, for example, one website was saying that trauma bonding is when one person intentionally takes advantage of the other person's trauma. That is, can I please say this in public? Bullshit. I don't like using language like that, but it is. It's bullshit. Here's why. The person who is doing the traumatizing or the re-traumatizing of their partner, guess what? They've been traumatized themselves. That's why they're acting that way. And not only that, they aren't even aware of what they're doing as wrong. They're not aware that they're hurting someone. Or when they are aware that it hurts because they've been given that feedback, they don't understand what it is that's hurting about what they're doing. Let me give you several examples. One example is so obvious, it's funny, actually. I had a couple in which the wife left the husband when his temper got so out of hand that no pun intended, he punched his hand through a wall and hurt himself in the process. And she left. He was devastated. And when we talked, he said to me, "My family was always dramatic. I thought that's how you express yourself." He literally didn't see it as threatening behavior or abusive in any way. He didn't intend to be abusive. So that intention concept has to go. It has to go. Because the person who's being abusive does not know the difference, usually. It's not something they're scheming. I was just reading in the Psychotherapy Networker that I used to be a subscriber to, but I'm kind of getting bored with. But anyway, there was one story about a professor of psychology who had an affair with his graduate student, and the poor wife was devastated, obviously, by it. Now, here's the thing. The guy is a professor of psychology, so you would think He knows what he's doing. He's doing something wrong and hurtful. And he tells his wife he's ending the affair. They go to marriage counseling. Things seem to get better, and he never did end the affair because she finds evidence that the affair is going on his phone. So what's going on? You can't say the guy doesn't know what he's doing because he clearly is a professor of psychology. He has to know it hurt his wife, and he has to know it's wrong. Not only that, he can lose his license and he could lose his job for it. These are very serious infractions from an ethical point of view in the field. So you can't, so what is going on? Here's what's going on. We all have parts of us that we really don't understand. I do, you do. Like, I've been very tired. Well, I know I'm jet lagged, but when I'm very tired, I also get kind of down. And I know this about myself. But if I don't stop to think of where that came from, I wouldn't know. Like, where did that come from? I went to my granddaughter's bas mitzvah. My son made a movie which consisted of various life stages of this precious girl, and I find myself crying unexpectedly at this film. Why? I don't know. I mean, I didn't know at the time. I had asked myself, what were those tears coming from? What were they all about? You could say, well, people are emotional. That doesn't explain it. There's a lot about each of us that we don't know. We don't really know the parts of us and why they're acting the way they're acting. So this professor, it turns out, in counseling with the marriage counselor, said that he felt inadequate. That's interesting. He's a professor. But see, that comes from his childhood. Maybe he had a father that never was satisfied with him, or a mother. Who knows? But he felt inadequate, so he had to flirt and he had to carry on an affair with someone half his age to feel good about himself because he didn't feel like he could measure up to who his wife was. We learn that in the middle of the story that's being presented in this magazine. Okay, but he had to dig deep inside himself to discover all that. So my point here is that just because you should know that you're wrong in your behavior does not mean you know why you're doing it, and it does not mean that you're willing to exert the energy to rein in the inappropriate behavior because it's doing something for you. That's why we have what's called a recidivism rate in the criminal world. People get sent to jail and it's a revolving door. They get left out and they commit another crime and nothing stops them. Why isn't it stopped? Something inside needs to do what they're doing. Okay, let's get back to trauma bonding. So trauma bonding was defined by somebody as a basically dysfunctional attachment. And you can look at the word dysfunctional as, yeah, it's not functional, but it is functional. That's really not what that person means. It serves a function for the parts of a person that have been traumatized. And usually it's both people that have been traumatized. And so one person is relating to the other person in, let's call it, an unhealthy way, not dysfunctional. It functions. It doesn't function well because you grew up. You were traumatized in childhood and then you grew up. And as an adult, you could do better. But if you can't do better, if you don't know how to do better, if you never got the help to learn how to do better, you can't actually do better. So this so-called dysfunctional attachment is what works for you. Now, I'll give you another example. I'm working with a married couple, and I have to tell you that many times I will separate my couple, sometimes for years. If they cannot sit in a room together and be honest with each other in a loving, kind, compassionate, grown up way, and truly reveal their own vulnerabilities in a way that feels safe for the future, because they won't be taken advantage of later for having done so. If they can't do all that, I separate them, because I still love each person and want the best for each person. And I know that right now they're not able to treat each other well together. So I have a couple that I'm working with now, and we made a little adjustment, and we're working together for some time. We made a little adjustment in something, and both reported it was great. It's going well. Great. And then the husband says, but my wife gets snappish. She kind of snaps. Maybe that's her personality. And I'm like, no, I don't think that's her personality. I think you must have done something without realizing it that triggered her. No, I didn't do anything. So I talked to the wife later on in a different session, and sure enough, he had done something. He was not aware of it. He thinks she's snapping at him because it's her personality. He really isn't consciously aware of what it is he's done. So these trauma bonds are connecting two people who have both had trauma, and they're handling things in a way that's not helpful. It's a better word than dysfunctional. It's functioning as best as they can. Like if someone loses a leg, they have a crutch. It's not dysfunctional to walk with a crutch. It's better to have two legs. But if you don't have one, you have a crutch instead, or two crutches. Am I making sense? All those of you who are on, please, am I making sense with this statement? I need to hear from you. I need to know. I hate the word dysfunctional because it is doing the best that person can do. Thank you. That's one of you guys. I have more of you on. Again, I'm going to share, for those of you who don't want your name printed out for the world to see on YouTube, I get it. You can assume a name that's not really yours and make a channel so that you can respond and have a name. Yes, it makes sense. It's a coping strategy. Yes, exactly. It's a coping strategy that's not consciously done. No one says, oh, I need to cope by being aggressive, or I need to cope by falling apart at the least drop of a hat, or I need to cope by playing victim. No one says it consciously. All our coping strategies come from whatever we could do as kids that worked to cope. And then we grew up with it because no one helped us do better. Because we were both, the two people were both traumatized. I can't stand the idea of pointing to one side as a victim and one side as the aggressor in this trauma bond thing. It's not fair. Now, would someone be necessarily more selfish and mean than the other, and therefore that's why they're the perpetrator? Yes, that's true. It could be. But as you're saying, it is a coping strategy that people simply had to use. They had no choice. They had no sense of any other possible thing to do. So here's what I did with this couple that I'm working with. I said, could I ask you to kind of notice when you get upset at what other feelings you might have besides that upsetness, which the upsetness is hiding. And then I backed off and I said, that's only if you feel you can do this. Maybe you're not ready. Now, why did I put that extra piece in there? Because maybe the guy isn't ready. The truth is that it hurts to look at your own pain. And when one person is mean or cheats or is gaslighting or any horrible thing like that to another person, these are all coping strategies, as you're pointing out. They're ways of dealing so that you don't look at your pain. And that is what the perpetrator, abuser person in this trauma bond scenario is going through. Now, I want to talk about the bond part of the trauma bond because this is very important to me. I believe you've probably not heard of, unless you've listened to me long enough, Murray Bowen. I should remember, if I do, to put his name in the description thing. Murray Bowen said something very interesting. He was a researcher of families, and he said like this: there's such a thing as being able to be kind of independent and yet able to connect and be loving and all that. That's healthy, right? The degree to which a person could be independent in that way turns out to affect who you choose as a marriage partner. And generally speaking, the more independent people will choose more independent people, and dependent people will choose more dependent people. I'm summarizing a very thick book as simply as I can, because we tend to be attracted to people who are kind of like us to the degree that we are able to kind of stand on our own and not be needy or be needy. We tend to be attracted to people who are more like us. So what that means is that if you have two healthy people, they'll be more attracted to each other and marry each other. And if you have two people with a background of abuse and trauma, they will tend to be more attracted to each other. It's just the way the world works. I think Murray Bowen is absolutely correct. From a purely spiritual perspective on this, you could say that you're finding your soulmate because they've been through something similar to what you've been through. And so you understand each other at a deep core level. Now, when you look at it that way, that's quite beautiful. That concept of soulmate, understanding each other at a deep level, is quite beautiful. It sounds very much the opposite of this horrible term trauma bonding. So we get to the picture that I had made up for the thumbnail of this talk. Which is it? Is the trauma bonding the guy abusing someone, or I guess the abuser could be the woman as well, with the whip or verbally? Or is the trauma bonding two people who have similar traumas and have fallen in love and bonded? And the answer is it could be both. It just depends on how painful the coping mechanisms that a person learned are. If they learn coping mechanisms of being kind and solicitous and worried about you because they had to take care of their parents who were both alcoholics or something, and both people are like that, and they make a marriage that way, then the bond coming from trauma could be a very good one for both of them. Or if they've both gone through therapy to heal their original traumas, then they also could end up with that big red heart and have a good relationship. So it's not that a trauma bond has to be bad. It could have a good ending. Somebody says, nice common ground, yes. In I can't read this, unconscious sense. Yes, that's what I'm saying. Absolutely. That is what Murray Bowen's position was. The more a person can be interdependent, meaning not too dependent, independent, but somewhat connected in a dependent way, is nice. You stand on your own, you come together, you could be a team in making decisions. And to the degree that each person had trauma, they will find someone with similar wounds. My example, my own marriage, my husband and I had very similar mothers. They were a little bit cold. I loved my mother-in-law. I really did. She was a good lady, a kind lady. But she had this thing about affection that was like you couldn't be. My mother was depressed, so she couldn't be affectionate because she was miserable. She was miserable for very good reasons, which I didn't understand. That had to do with her childhood. And luckily, we both had fathers that were warm and loving. Isn't that fascinating how that all kind of matched up? So we had our wounds, both of us, and we had our strengths. And we were attracted to each other because we were kind of in the same place in our degree of independence and interdependence. Now, what I want to do is quote from one of the websites I was looking at to see how other people look at trauma bonding. And this was very interesting. This person said, let's say I ask someone, what is it you really love about the person you're with? They'll say, there's just something about them. We've always had this connection. I love their confidence. I just feel good around them. And when it's good, we can talk about anything for hours, etc. She says, I get terrified when I hear answers like this. These are not good answers. The kind of answers she wants are, in a healthy relationship, they're the most empathic person I know. They have my back in every situation. Our communication is strong even when we disagree. They are kind and thoughtful and compassionate and honest. Do you see where this is going? This lady is saying the kind of reasons to feel loving for someone is a healthy sense of appreciation for their qualities. And this nebulous thing about attraction, she doesn't like. Well, I agree with her. I mean, that's very nice. But you won't get that in the normal world outside. You won't get that because those people who have been through traumas and feel loved and connected to by someone else who happens to be at their same level of differentiation. That's the word that Murray Bowen likes to use for degree of independence versus dependence. That same level is going to depend on the person's trauma history. And it's not their fault if they're going to give the first list instead of the second list. Is the second list healthier? Yeah. But don't get worried and nervous and blame people for the first list. Instead, don't try to split them up. Try to help both of them. Now, I want to take that story in the networker because it was bothering me so much. If that guy was in counseling with me, here's what I think must have gone wrong. I could be wrong. I don't know the people. It's just a story. So I'm making up my ending to it. I think the therapist did not develop a close enough personal relationship with the man who cheated, because he cheated with this graduate student at the risk of his professorship. And then when he went to counseling with the counselor, he ended up continuing to cheat. So I don't think he developed that close relationship with his therapist in which he would have felt safe to tell her and admit to her that he was cheating. The way I work with couples, let's say someone doesn't come in. Let's say I have a wife come in. It's usually the wife that will initiate therapy and say her husband refuses. I will do every dance and every jig and every trick in the book to get the other person to come in if I possibly can. I will call them up and say, it's usually my practice to hear from the spouse so I really know what's going on. Because I only hear one side of a story, I need to hear your side. I will do that. And I will offer for them to come in alone so that we can develop a rapport. And if they like me and they trust me and they feel comfortable with me, what I then do is make sure to not make them feel blamed or labeled. No, you're not a narcissist. You're not an abuser. You're not a gaslighter. You're not a trauma bonder. You're a person. And you've had trauma. And you may be reacting in a way that's not helpful. I don't know. Maybe it is. But can we explore this a little more? I'd like to get to know you as a human being. Do you see how that could make a difference? And I would split them up. If people are having an affair, I would split them up. And I would ask that guy, if he does openly admit to me that he's still having the affair, what is the need? Because it's serving a need, just like crack cocaine is serving a need to the addict. It's serving a need. Is it a healthy need? No. But it's helped him in the past. Many people who cheat to build up their own sense of self because they don't have one. Now, you may be very surprised that this guy was a professor at a university, a psychology professor of all things, and yet doesn't have a sense of self. But really, it makes perfect sense. Most therapists go into it because they have been broken and they're looking for healing. And I give every one of them, including myself, credit. You're looking for healing. You're not trying to pretend it doesn't need healing. This guy, on the other hand, wasn't at a place yet to admit that he felt broken and needed healing, although he does admit it. I mean, it was in the story that he felt inadequate, and that's why he started the affair. So I would work with him on that. Why do you feel inadequate? You've accomplished so much in your life. What do you think of yourself? How come? How come this, of all things, an affair with a young graduate student is helping that, etc., etc., etc.? Someone writes, wow, what a less judgmental view. That's exactly my point. Thank you for putting it in those terms. That's my mission, if you will, as a therapist, to not be judgmental, because no one asked to have the life that they were dished out. Look, let's say you walked into my house and I was screaming my head off. I was like out of my mind. You'd think I was crazy, right? Then it turns out that I just had dropped the hammer on my little toe. Oh, that's why. Now her screaming makes sense. She just got hurt. Psychological pain is the same thing. If someone acts wrong, hurtful, abusive, taking advantage of your trauma, it's because they also had some trauma that caused them to have these coping strategies that help them get through. That's the way oops, am I running late? Getting on my own bandwagon. That's the way that they coped, and they bring that into their marriage. And as a therapist, instead of judging them for it, which would be just so stupid, and I'm sorry to say this, but any therapist who judges their client and criticizes them is stupid, because you're not going to accomplish your job, which is to promote A, healing that one person, and B, healing the marriage. You're not going to accomplish that in any other way. Psychological and physical pain creates trauma. Yes, thank you. Whoever you are, I love you. Because you're trying to really, you're showing me that I'm making sense. And I love that, because I want that message out there. So thank you very much. Yes, for your comments. I appreciate it. So thank you. So what does a therapist who works the way I do? As I said, I might have to split people up so that they can open up to me, because then I have a connection with them and they feel understood. And there may have been nobody in their life that made them feel understood. And I do understand. They used whatever coping strategies they could to deal with what came up for them. And I really don't judge them. I'm not putting on an act. I'm trying to understand how A leads to B. You drop something, gravity makes it fall. A leads to B. All coping strategies have a good reason. Okay, so I work with them like that. I also try to help them start to become aware of their own behavior and aware of the emotions that are underneath that behavior, because their emotions are driving the behavior. And it's very important. You cannot just work in a behavioral way. You've got to work from a place of emotions. So for an example, this professor, how do you feel when you're with this young girl? I feel great. Let me ask you something. When you're with your wife, how do you feel? Not so good. What is happening inside your head? What are the two things that are different? Well, my wife talks about like what we need to do, like for the kids' education, and how we should sort out our finances, and maybe we need to move. These are all like not very romantic things. And reality is hard, whereas the graduate student that I'm having an affair with, all we talk about is how much we love each other. Oh, I see. I would understand that as a therapist. But let me ask you something. It sounds to me like this graduate student is kind of taking you away from reality. Would you agree with that? He would probably have to say, yeah, just like alcohol and drugs and gambling and shopping and overworking and watching YouTube videos all day are taking you away from reality, unless you watch mine because they're all about reality. But even that's taking you away if you spend all your time watching and not implementing. See? So we would go on so that the person starts to understand their feelings. But there's more, because reality is painful. Then we have to help this guy to do the one thing he never did, which is love himself. It can't come from the graduate student. It can't even come from his own wife, because it has to come from himself. He has to love himself, and he probably doesn't, and that's why he cheated. It's filling a gap that should be in his own self, right here. Yes, fantasy island, addiction. Exactly. Right. That is how I would help that guy. I don't believe his therapist, his marriage therapist, ever did that, because they were seen together all the time, and he probably didn't feel comfortable sharing that he didn't really love his wife because he loved this girl because of how she made him feel. The reality is, he can't even know if he loves his wife. Why is that? Because the love he has for the girl is not love for the girl. It's love for what she makes him feel about himself. See? And you can't expect that from another person. That's temporary. That's why 75% of second marriages end up in divorce. You've got to do it for yourself. You've got to love yourself. So I separate them. And then after the awareness of their feelings for themselves, I start building up their feeling for themselves. Well, what do you like about yourself? What have you done in your life that's good? Who are you? You're not all bad. No one is all bad. I help them recognize the difference between the past and the present. They may have gotten messages from the past about how rotten they are, which isn't even true. Well, I've been cheating on my wife. That's rotten. Okay, I agree. It is. But that's not all of who you are. That's the part of you that was escaping from facing this self of yours that you thought you didn't even like, which came from the past. Can we separate out the past from the present now? That would be my next step of work with that person. And finally, when the person starts to recognize that he has a self and it's a beautiful thing, he starts to have to forgive himself for his past mistakes, which were driven by this past history of his trauma, which he brought into his present life. It's only after he can forgive himself that he can then turn with love and kindness and compassion to his real wife, if she stays with him long enough for all that. And she may not want to. But that's how I work with trauma bonded people. And when I say trauma bonded, I mean people with a trauma history who have bonded for the reason that they have, as Murray Bowen said, the same level of differentiation, which is perfectly normal. And that's how it works. Let me read if there's more here. He was giving from an empty cup. Yeah. So I'm glad you liked the process. I kept everyone 10 minutes extra. Okay, good. I hope you all don't mind being kept late. But thank you for being on here, and those of you who have typed in to share, I very much appreciate it. And those of you, again, who didn't feel comfortable to type in to share, you can create a channel or name for yourself on YouTube that's not your name. And people do that all the time, and then you can feel free because no one will know who you are. All right, you guys, thank you so much for joining and commenting. I love it. I love it. And yes, I'm back. It was a nice vacation, and now I'm back. Take care, you guys.